Section 9 from Richard of Jamestown. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Richard of Jamestown, A Story of the Virginia Colony, by James Otis. Section 9. Trapping Turkeys. The wild turkeys had appeared in the forest in great numbers, but few had been killed by our people because of the savages, many of whom were not to be trusted, even though the chiefs of 3 tribes professed to be friendly. It was this fact which had prevented us from doing much in the way of hunting. Now that we were in such stress for food, and since all had turned laborers, whether willingly or no, much in the way of provisions was needed. Captain Smith set about taking the turkeys as he did about most other matters, which is to say, that it was done in a thorough manner. Instead of being forced to spend at least 1 charge of powder for each fowl killed, he proposed that we trap them, and showed how it might be done according to his belief. 4 men were told off to do the work, and they were kept busy cutting saplings and trimming them down until there was nothing left save poles from 15 to 20 feet long. Then, with these poles laid one above the other, a square pen was made, and at the top was a thatching of branches, so that no fowl larger than a pigeon might go through. From one side of this trap, or turkey pen, was dug a ditch perhaps 2 feet deep, and the same in width, running straightway into the thicket where the turkeys were in the custom of roosting, for a distance of 20 feet or more. This ditch was carried underneath the side of the pen, where was an opening hardly more than large enough for 1 turkey to pass through. Corn was scattered along the whole length of the ditch, and thus was the trap set. The turkeys, on finding the trail of corn, would follow hurriedly along, like the gluttons they are, with the idea of coming upon a larger horde, and thus pass through into the pen. Once inside, they were trapped securely, for the wild turkeys hold his head so high that he can never see the way out through a hole which is at a level with his feet. It was a most ingenious contrivance, and on the first morning after it had been set at night we had 50 plump fellows securely caged, when it was only necessary to enter the trap by crawling through the top and kill them at our leisure. It may be asked how we made shift to cook such a thing as a turkey, other than by boiling it in a kettle, and this can be told in very few words, for it was a simple matter after once you had become accustomed to it. A crude kind of chimney. First you must know, however, that when our houses of logs had been built, we had nothing with which to make a chimney such as one finds in London. We had no bricks, and although mayhap flat rocks might have been found enough for 2 or 3, there was no mortar in the whole land of Virginia with which to fasten them together. Therefore it was we were forced to build a chimney of logs, laying it up on the outside much as we had the house, but plentifully besmearing it with mud on the inside, and chinking the crevices with moss and clay. When this had been done, a hole was cut for the smoke, directly through the side of the house. The danger of setting the building on fire was great, but we strove to guard against it so much as possible by plastering a layer of mud over the wood, and by keeping careful watch when we had a roaring fire. Oftentimes were we forced to stop in the task of cooking, take all the vessels from the coals, and throw water upon the blazing logs. The chimney was a rude affair, of course, and perhaps if we had had women among us, they would have claimed that no cooking could be done, when all the utensils were placed directly on the burning wood, or hung above it with chains fastened to the top of the fireplace. But when lads like Nathaniel and me, who had never had any experience in cooking with proper tools, set about the task, it did not seem difficult, for we were accustomed to nothing else. Cooking a turkey. And this is how we could roast a turkey. After drawing the entrails from the bird, we filled him full of chinquapin nuts, which grow profusely in this land, and are, perhaps, of some relation to the chestnut. An oaken stick, sufficiently long to reach from one side of the fireplace to the other, and trimmed with knives until it was no larger around than the ramrod of a matchlock, forms our spit, and this we thrust through the body of the bird from end to end. A pile of rocks on either side of the fireplace, at a proper distance from the burning wood, serves as rests for the ends of the wooden spit, and when thus placed the bird will cook in front of the fire, if whosoever is attending to the labor turns the carcass from time to time, so that each portion may receive an equal amount of heat. I am not pretending to say that this is a skillful method of cooking, but if you had been with us in Jamestown, and were as hungry as we often were, a wild turkey filled with chinquapin nuts, and roasted in such fashion, would make a very agreeable dinner. We were put to it for a table, but yet a sort of shelf made from a plank roughly split out of the trunk of a tree, and furnished with 2 legs on either end, was not as awkward as one may fancy, for we had no chairs on which to sit while eating, but squatting on the ground, and this low bench served our purpose as well as a better piece of furniture would have done. When the captain was at home, he carved the bird with his hunting knife, and one such fowl would fill the largest trencher bowl we had among us. Nor could we be overly nice while eating, and since we had no napkins on which to wipe our fingers, a plentiful supply of water was necessary to cleanse one's hands, for these wild turkeys are overly fat in the months of September and October, and he who holds as much of the cooked flesh in his hand as is needed for a hearty dinner squeezes therefrom a considerable amount in the way of grease. We were better off for vessels in which to put our food than in many other respects, for we had of trencher bowls in abundance, and the London Company had outfitted us with ware of iron, or of brass, or of copper, until our poor table seemed laden with an exceeding rich store. Candles or rushlights. To provide lights for ourselves, now that the evenings were grown longer, was a much more difficult task than to cook without proper conveniences, for it cost considerable labor. We had our choice between the candlewood, as the pitch pine is called, or rushlights, which last are made by stripping the outer bark from the common rushes, thus leaving the pit bare, then dipping these in tallow or grease, and allowing them to harden. In such manner did we get makeshifts for candles, neither pleasing to the eye, nor affording very much in the way of light. Yet they served in a certain degree to dispel the darkness when by reason of storm we were shut in the dwellings, and made the inside of the house very nearly cheerful in appearance. To get the tallow or grease with which to make these rushlights, we saved the fat of the deer or the bear, or even a portion of the grease from turkeys, and having gathered sufficient for the candle making, mixed them all in one pot for melting. The task of gathering the candlewood was more pleasing, and yet oftentimes had in it more of work, for it was the knots of the trees which gave the better light, and we might readily fasten them upon an iron skewer or rod, which was driven into the side of the house for such purpose. Some of our people, who were too lazy to search for knots, split the wood into small sticks, each about the size of a goose quill, and standing 3 or 4 in a vessel filled with sand, gained as much in the way of light as might be had from one pine knot. Of course those who were overly particular would find fault with the smoke from this candlewood, and complain of the tar which oozed from it. But one who lives in the wilderness must not expect to have all the luxuries that can be procured in London. The visit of Pocahontas. We had a visitor from the village of Powhatan very soon after Captain Smith took command of Jamestown, to such an extent that the gentlemen were forced to work and to speak without oaths, through fear of getting too much cold water inside the sleeves of their doublets. This visitor was the same Indian girl I had seen making bread, and quite by chance our house was the first she looked into, which caused me such pride, for I believed she was attracted to it because it was more cleanly than many of the others. We were all at home when she came, being about to partake of the noonday meal, which was neither more nor less than a big turkey, weighing more than 20 pounds, and roasted to a brownness which would cause a hungry person's mouth to water. Although she who had halted to look in at our door was only a girl, Captain Smith treated her as if she were the greatest lady in the world, himself leading her inside to his own place at the trencher board, while she, in no ways shy, began to help herself to the fattest pieces of the meat, thereby besmearing herself with grease until there was enough running down her chin to have made no less than 2 rushlights, so Nathaniel Peacock declared. Of course, being a savage, she could not speak in our language, but the master, who had studied diligently since coming to this world of Virginia to learn the speech of the Indians, made shift to get from her some little information, she being the daughter of Powhatan, the king concerning whom I have already set down many things. At first Captain Smith was of the belief that she had come on some errand, but after much questioning, more by signs than words, it came out, as we understood the matter, that the girl was in Jamestown for no other purpose than to see what we white people were like. Captain Smith was minded that she should be satisfied, so far as her curiosity was concerned, for when the dinner had come to an end, and I had given this king's daughter some dry, sweet grass on which to wipe her hands and mouth, he conducted her around the village, allowing that she look in upon the tents and houses at her pleasure. She stayed with us until the sun was within an hour of setting, and then darted off into the forest as does a startled pheasant, stopping for a single minute when she had got among the trees, to wave her hand, as if bidding us good-bye, or in playing mischief. Section 9.